Story 1. It's funny the way childhood memories can curdle over time. What seemed like a minor, slightly odd blip in the landscape of a 9-year-old's summer can, with an adult perspective, reveal itself as something far more sinister. Mine involves a man I only ever knew as Mr. Peterson and the overgrown patch of woods at the end of Miller Street we kids just called the thicket. The thicket wasn't much, really, just a tangled mess of poplars, thorny bushes, and a few ancient oaks that had somehow escaped the suburban sprawl that had eaten up the surrounding farmland. For me, Sarah, and my best friend Liam, it was our kingdom. We built flimsy forts, hunted for treasure, bottle caps, and lost dog toys, and we reveled in the sort of unsupervised freedom that seems almost mythical now. That summer, the summer I turned 9, was particularly hot and lazy. Liam and I were deep in the thicket one sweltering July afternoon, trying to dam a tiny muddy trickle of a creek when we first saw him. He was sitting on a fallen log near the edge of the clearing we favored, a place where a patch of sunlight usually broke through the canopy. He was an older man, maybe my grandpa's age, with neatly combed gray hair and round wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a light blue short-sleeved shirt, neatly pressed, and khaki trousers, clothes that seemed too tidy for scrambling around in the woods. In his lap, he held a small, worn, leather-bound book and a pencil. He didn't say anything, just looked up from his book and gave us a small, almost shy smile. Liam, ever the bolder of us, chirped, "Hi." "Hello, children," he replied, his voice soft and a little reedy. "Just enjoying the quiet." We mumbled "hi" back, and feeling a bit awkward, returned to our dam building, though with less enthusiasm. The feeling of being watched was palpable. I remember glancing over a few times. He wasn't staring, precisely. More like his gaze would just drift over to us, linger for a moment, then return to his book. It wasn't overtly threatening, but it was new. An adult, a stranger, in our space. When I mentioned him to my mom, later she just said, "Oh, probably just Mr. Peterson from down the way. Likes his birdwatching, I think. As long as he doesn't bother you, it's fine." That was the first I'd heard his name, and Mom's casual dismissal settled my initial unease, at least for a time. But he started being there more often. Almost every time Liam and I went to the thicket, Mr. Peterson would be there, on his log, with his little book. Sometimes he'd be looking up at the trees, sometimes at the sky, sometimes just in our general direction. He'd always offer that same quiet smile and a soft, "hello." He never approached, never tried to join in our games, but his presence began to feel like a permanent fixture, a silent, observing statue. The subtle shift started with the questions. One afternoon, Liam had gone home early, and I was trying to identify different types of leaves, a project for school I'd procrastinated on. "That's a maple, I believe," Mr. Peterson said, his voice making me jump. I hadn't heard him approach. He was standing a few feet away, no longer on his log. "Acer rubrum, if I'm not mistaken. Red maple." "Oh, thanks," I mumbled, clutching my handful of leaves. "You enjoy nature, Sarah?" he asked. My stomach did a little flip. I hadn't told him my name. Mom must have mentioned it, I reasoned, trying to push down a fresh wave of discomfort. "Yeah, it's okay," I said. He nodded, his eyes magnified by his glasses, seeming to fix on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "It's full of interesting things. Things worth observing. Things worth remembering." He tapped the leather-bound book. "I like to make notes about the little details." That was the first time I felt a real, undeniable sliver of fear. Not panic, but a distinct, cold unease. His words were innocent enough, but his gaze, the way he said, "little details," it felt loaded. Liam started to find excuses not to go to the thicket as much. "It's boring now," he'd say, or, "My mom wants me to stay closer to home." I knew it was Mr. Peterson. I didn't blame him. I was starting to feel it too. But the thicket was mine, and I was stubborn. The next memorable encounter was a week or so later. I was alone again, trying to coax a ladybug onto my finger. "They bring good luck, you know," Mr. Peterson said, appearing beside me as if materialized from the dappled shadows. This time, he was closer than before. I could smell a faint, musty scent, like old paper and something vaguely sweet, like pipe. Tobacco, though, I never saw him smoke. My grandma says that, I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice was a bit shaky. He crouched down, his knees cracking. I have something you might like to see, Sarah, he said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. He opened his leather-bound book. I'd always assumed it was for notes, or maybe sketches of birds. The first few pages were notes, dense, spidery handwriting I couldn't decipher. Then, he flipped a few more pages. These pages had drawings, not birds or leaves. They were crude, childlike drawings, almost stick figures, but with an unsettling attention to certain details. One showed a small figure, unmistakably a girl by the triangle dress, standing alone by a swing set that looked exactly like the one in my backyard. Another showed two figures, a boy and a girl by a creek, building something that looked very much like our failed dam. The figures were always small, often drawn from a distance, or partially obscured by crudely drawn trees or bushes. My breath caught in my throat. "Who drew these?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Peterson smiled, that same quiet, unreadable smile. "I dabble," he said. "I like to capture moments. Little moments that might otherwise be forgotten." He turned another page. This drawing was different. It was just one figure, a girl with pigtails, my hairstyle that day, standing with her, back to the viewer, looking into a darkened window of a house. The house looked disturbingly like mine, and in the window, barely visible, was another fainter stick figure, watching from inside. "Is that—" I started, a cold dread spreading through my chest. "Just an observation," he said smoothly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Sometimes, when you're looking at things, Sarah, you find they're looking back at you." He then reached into his trouser pocket. "I have some sweets here," he said, his voice still soft, but with an edge to it I hadn't heard before. "Wrapped caramels. Your favorite, aren't they?" How did he know I loved caramels? I never ate them in the thicket. My mom bought them, kept them in a jar on the kitchen counter. The same counter visible from the window in his drawing. That was it. The caramels, the drawing of my house, the unsettling implication of being watched in the woods, and then at home, too. It all crashed together. This wasn't a friendly old man enjoying nature. This was something else. Something wrong. I didn't say anything. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. I have to go," I stammered, backing away. "My mom's calling me." Mr. Peterson didn't try to stop me. He just watched me, his expression unchanging, that slight smile still playing on his lips. "Very well, Sarah. Run along. I'll be here." I ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, out of the thicket, down Miller Street, not stopping until I burst through my front door, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. My mom, bless her, took me seriously this time. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by a stark fear in her own eyes as I sobbed out the story, the details of the drawings, the caramels. My dad, white-faced and grim, went straight to the thicket. Mr. Peterson was gone. His log was empty. There was no sign he'd ever been there, except for a single wrapped caramel lying in the dirt where he'd been crouching. The police were called. They patrolled, asked questions. No one named Mr. Peterson officially lived in the neighborhood. That matched his description. Some people vaguely remembered seeing an older man walking around sometimes. He was never found, never identified. The leather-bound book, with its strange notes and disturbing little drawings, vanished with him. I never went back to the thicket alone. Liam and I found other places to play, closer to home, in more open spaces. But the memory of Mr. Peterson, of his soft voice and his two knowing eyes, never really left me. It's the adult understanding that chills me most now. He wasn't just an eccentric old man. He was watching. He was learning details. The drawings weren't just dabbles. They were records, trophies even. And that last drawing, the one of me looking into my own window with someone looking back, it still makes my skin crawl. What little details had he been planning to observe next? The ambiguity of his true intentions, the quiet, patient way he insinuated himself into my world, is far more frightening than any monster under the bed. The caramels, a supposed treat, now feel like the most sinister lure of all. And I'm left wondering, even all these years later, how many other little moments he captured in that worn leather book. Story 2. My name is Chloe, and if there's one thing I learned last fall, it's that peace and quiet can sometimes come with a very unsettling price tag. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and I'd hit a wall on a massive project. The city was too loud, too distracting. So, I rented a small, slightly run-down cottage a couple of hours out, nestled deep in the sort of woods where your cell service goes to die. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a sweet old guy who lived in the nearest town and pretty much left me to it. It seemed perfect. My only nearby neighbor, if you could call him that, was a man named Arthur. His house was a similar isolated affair, maybe a quarter-mile down the winding dirt track, mostly obscured by a dense stand of ancient pines. He introduced himself that first weekend I was there. He was in his late 50s, I guessed, with watery pale blue eyes that never quite seemed to meet mine, and hands that were perpetually stained with dark earth. Avid gardener, he'd said with a faint, almost apologetic smile. Initially, he seemed harmless enough, if a bit odd. He'd leave little offerings on my porch railing, a few perfectly ripe tomatoes, a single glossy zucchini. Good soil. Around here, he told me once, his gaze drifting towards the trees. Knows what you need. It was kind, I told myself. Just a lonely man being neighborly. It too felt like I was being observed. How did he know when I was out of tomatoes? My unease started as a low hum, something I tried to ignore. I'd be sitting on the little screened-in porch, trying to work, and I'd get that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd glance towards his property, but the trees were too thick. I never saw him. Then came the comments. Dropped, casually when he'd happened to be tending the scraggly patch of flowers near the start of my driveway when I drove out. Saw you were up late working again, Chloe, he said one morning. The light burns bright in your window. My stomach gave a little lurch. My office was at the back of the cottage, facing the deepest part of the woods. How could he possibly see my particular window through all those trees at night? I started drawing the curtains earlier. I hated feeling cooped up, but I did it. The real chill set in when he started knowing things he shouldn't. Things I'd only discussed on phone calls inside the house, with the doors and windows shut. Heard you were thinking of painting those old porch chairs blue, he remarked one afternoon, startling me as I was getting my mail. I'd just been on the phone with my sister, debating that very thing. Good choice, he continued, his eyes doing that strange slide away from mine. Brings out the color of the hydrangeas I planted by your fence line years ago? I frowned. Hydrangeas? I haven't seen any. Oh, they're there, he said, with a little nod. Just need a bit of tending. Perhaps. My internal monologue became a frantic seesaw. He's just lonely. He's making conversation. He's harmless. And then the darker swing. This isn't normal. How does he know these things? That faint, damp earth smell that always clung to him. It was starting to make my skin crawl. The silence of the woods at night, once a comfort, now amplified every creak of the old cottage, making me jump at shadows. The climax, if you can call it that, wasn't dramatic in a loud way. It was quiet, and all the more terrifying for it. I was working late, the only light in the house spilling from my desk lamp. It was close to midnight when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching at the back door. The door that led to the densest, darkest part of the woods, the part that backed onto uncultivated land. My heart hammered. I crept to the door, peering through the tiny peephole. It was Arthur. He was holding a small, rusty trowel, and his face was pale in the moonlight. Chloe? He called softly, his voice muffled. Just noticed a persistent weed here, right by your step. Needs taking care of. Can you open up? Wouldn't want it to spread. It was pitch black outside. There were no weeds near my back door. It was a patch of gravel. My blood ran cold. I'm busy, Arthur, I managed, my voice trembling. I'll get it in the morning. There was a long pause. I could almost feel him standing there, just on the other side of the thin wooden door. Then I heard his footsteps, slow and deliberate, receding into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, as soon as it was light, I went to the back door. There was a freshly disturbed patch of earth right by the step, and nestled in it, almost buried, was a small, antique porcelain doll. Its face was cracked, one painted eye was missing, and its remaining eye stared blankly up at my door. It hadn't been there before. It was undeniably chillingly placed. And the hydrangeas he'd mentioned? Behind the rickety old shed, I found a newly planted, already wilting hydrangea bush, the soil around its base dark and freshly turned. He'd been on my property, in the dead of night, digging, planting things, leaving tokens. I packed my laptop and a few clothes and left within the hour. I called Mr. Henderson from the road, rambling some excuse about a family emergency. I never went back for the rest of my stuff. I still don't know what Arthur's intentions truly were. Was he just a profoundly strange, lonely man with a terrifying lack of boundaries? Or was the doll a gift, a warning, a symbol of something I don't even want to comprehend? The quiet I'd craved now feels like a spotlight, and the smell of damp earth can still make me break out in a cold sweat. Story 3. My name is Maya. Back when I was a student at the city college, my evenings were often spent in the library or in late-running study groups. This meant a lot of late-night bus rides home, usually a pretty mundane affair. Just me, a handful of other tired commuters, and the rhythmic drone of the engine. Until they started appearing. There were 2 of them. The first time I noticed them, they got on a few stops after me. One was tall and gaunt, almost skeletal, with lank, greasy dark hair that perpetually fell into his eyes. He always wore the same threadbare, oversized black hoodie, pulled up, regardless of the weather. The other was shorter, stockier, with a shaved head that looked unnervingly pale under the bus's fluorescent lights. He had a nervous, twitchy energy about him, constantly cracking his knuckles with a sharp, snapping sound. That first night, they sat together a few rows behind me. The gaunt one just stared. Not in an aggressive, confrontational way, but with a fixed, unblinking intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to ignore it, telling myself he was probably just zoned out. A few nights later, they were on the bus again. This time, the gaunt one was humming. It was a low, tuneless, almost guttural sound like a broken generator, and it seemed to vibrate right through the metal frame of the bus. The shorter one kept darting quick, sly glances at me, a faint smirk playing on his lips whenever he thought I wasn't looking. I started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. It escalated subtly. They started sitting closer. If I chose a seat near the front, they'd occupy the seats just across the aisle, or the row directly behind me. The humming would be louder, more insistent, and the rhythmic crack, crack, crack of the shorter one's knuckles would punctuate the silence between stops. The air around them always seemed to carry a faint, unidentifiable metallic odor, like old pennies or stale blood, mixed with the usual bus smell of diesel and disinfectant. My internal debate became a nightly ritual. They're just weirdos. Don't make eye contact. They're not doing anything to you. But that would slowly curdle into, this isn't random. That hum. It feels like it's for me. One night, the bus was emptier than usual. Just me, an elderly woman dozing near the front, and them. They were across the aisle. The shorter one leaned forward and muttered, just loud enough for me to hear over the engine and the relentless hum, "Pretty little bird, all alone tonight." He wasn't looking directly at me, his gaze fixed on the grimy window, but the gaunt one's humming hitched for a second, then resumed, somehow deeper, more resonant. My blood turned to ice. He was talking about me. There was no other pretty little bird on that bus. The climax came a week later. My stop was next. The bus was practically deserted. As it rumbled to a halt, the gaunt man suddenly stopped humming. The silence that crashed down was almost more terrifying than the noise. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and his eyes, dark, depthless, and utterly devoid of any discernible emotion, locked directly onto mine. The shorter one stood up, a predatory grin spreading across his face, his knuckles cracking like gunshots in the quiet. He half-blocked the aisle. "Nice night for a walk, eh?" he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, that they intended to follow me off that bus. The doors hissed open. I didn't hesitate, didn't look back. I bolted. I didn't run towards my usual dimly lit side street. Instead, I sprinted towards the main, brightly lit thoroughfare, a longer route home. I could hear heavy footsteps pounding on the pavement behind me for a block, accompanied by a low, guttural chuckle that echoed the hum. I didn't dare look back. I saw the glowing sign of an all-night convenience store and lunged for the door, bursting inside, shaking and gasping for air. I stayed there for nearly half an hour, peering out the window like a cornered animal, until I was absolutely sure they were gone. I changed my schedule after that. I dropped my late evening class, took taxis I couldn't really afford, and avoided that bus route for months. I never saw that pair again. Were they just opportunists looking for an easy target? Or was there something more calculated, a more pointed malevolence, in their relentless focus on me? I still don't know. But even now, years later, the sound of someone humming tunelessly in a quiet place, or the sharp crack of knuckles, can send an irrational jolt of fear through me. The feeling of being singled out, of being silently hunted in such a mundane public space, is a violation that still echoes,